Right. And then come back into Zoom. And screen share. Yeah, I mean it could be my internet because that's where the meetings come from. So we'll try this. It could be that. I'm sorry if it is, everyone. Let's find out. First question, can you see the slides?
Yes. Yes.
Hurrah. Right, here we go. Stand by.
For the beauty of the earth, for the beauty of the skies, for the love which from above, over and around us lies. Gracious God, to you we raise this our sacrifice of praise. For the beauty of each hour of the day and of the night, hill and vale and tree and flower, sun and moon and stars of light. Gracious God, to you we raise this our sacrifice of praise. For the joy of ear and eye, for the heart and mind's delight, for the mystic harmony, linking sense to sound and sight. Gracious God, to you we raise this our sacrifice of praise. For the joy of human love, brother, sister, parent, child, friends on earth and friends above, pleasures pure and undefiled. Gracious God, to you we raise this our sacrifice of praise. For each perfect gift and sign of your love so freely given, graces human and divine, flowers of earth and birds of heaven. Gracious God, to you we raise this our sacrifice of praise.
Did anybody else have echo that time, just out of interest?
Yeah, it was clear there. There was a little crackling, but yeah.
Okay, but not the echo thing?
No.
No, right, okay, weird.
Just me, I think.
Is it still happening now for you, Melissa?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you're talking right now, it's not echoing. It was just screen share for some reason. But if you're still hearing an echo at your end, it might be a Zoom thing. But
Could close Zoom and go back in. Perhaps that might help.
Okay, it's echoing for me. So I might quit out of Zoom and come back in again because I'm clearly having some Zoom issue.
Okay, is this where I can hand over to
Yeah.
Godfrey to run the rest of it then? I'm not
I'll be
prepared
back
for
in 1
this.
minute, folks.
Okay.
So,
Okay. So we shall continue. Hopefully see Melissa in a moment. Let's pray. I invite you to respond with the words, we praise you, to the words, Creator God. Creator God, we praise you. Creator God, we glimpse your beauty in setting sun and mountain top. We sense your power in thunder crash, lightning flash, and ocean's roar. Creator God, we praise you. Precious Jesus, we see your love stretched out upon a cruel cross. We stand in awe at your sacrifice, love poured out for humankind. Creator God, we praise you.
Praise you.
Holy Spirit, we see your power in lives transformed and hearts on fire. We listen for your still, small voice, comforting, guiding, calling. Creator God, we praise you. In our moments of doubt and unbelief, when worldly pressure or circumstance become the distance between us, draw near, we pray. Remind us of the grace that we first knew, the Father's love, the Spirit's breath. Grant us courage, a faith that endures, and the sure knowledge that you are with us today and always, never further away than a whispered prayer. Amen.
Amen.
Just as Melissa joins us, I think when I was dishing up the children's tea, she might have said this. Have you said this already, Melissa?
No, I haven't. So I just gave a little bit introduction to stuff to do with Synod, but I haven't talked about the stuff on here. So.
Okay. How's your echo now? Is it?
I think I've worked out what it was. And it's to do with whether it's defaulting to the speakers that it should be defaulting to, or whether it's defaulting to some different ones. So I think I've worked out what it was, but we'll see.
Okay. Shall I shut up now and you carry on?
I'm okay. Climate justice for all. So a reminder that in 2021, it will be a pivotal year in the fight against the climate crisis. In November, the UN will hold its annual climate conference, the Conference of Parties 26 or COP26, which is meeting in Glasgow, so obviously on home soil. Climate Justice for All is a global campaign which is led by young people from the Methodist Church from Britain, Fiji, Italy, Uruguay and Zambia. The goal is to encourage Methodist churches and partners around the world to commit to taking action for climate justice and call on their representatives at COP26 to make climate justice possible for everyone. So we've got this really important meeting happening in our country in Glasgow in November. So that's what, sort of 6-8 weeks from now. And that's one of the reasons why this has become a particularly hot topic that we're talking about across churches and within our conferences and synods and other meetings. So that's why we really need to be thinking about it, and also thinking not just about it as a thing we ought to do because David Attenborough talks about it on programs, and because it's a good thing to do, but also how it's part of our Christian responsibility to the world and to other people within the world and to the other animals who live and share this world with us. So one of the things that we're going to be looking at today is climate justice, not just for a moral thing, but as a Christian perspective and as something that we should be doing as people who have been given this world as a gift by God. So we're going to have a look at our next slide, James, if that's all right. Sorry.
Yes, no, did you want to go back to your screen share? Is that easier? I realise that actually it's only me who can see what comes next. Sorry. That'd be easier.
Yeah, we can do. Martha,
Okay.
I am just doing this, sweetheart.
Sorry.
Martha, I cannot do it right now, baby. Okay. I can't share screen because I'm not.
Because I need to make you a co-host. Yes.
Martha, go and press the red button on the remote control to turn the screen back on. The big red button at the top.
There we go.
Okay. I want that one there. Okay, and I apologise because I'm now going to have to flick through a couple of slides because I've had to start it again. And I promise that we did spend quite a lot of time actually thinking and planning this,
Yes.
even though with my internet and Zoom issues, it kind of looks like I didn't know what I was doing.
Well, no, I've had a technology fail as well.
Lots of the time, but possibly not so much for tonight. So we're thinking about what from the Bible and or your faith inspires you to care for creation and what hinders you in caring for creation. So these are some of the questions that we considered at Synod on Saturday. So what in the Bible inspires us to care for creation and what hinders us in caring for creation? So what inspires us to be making changes in our lives to make a difference in the world? What hinders us? What makes it harder? So I wonder if anybody would like to share some thoughts around that. What from the Bible and or your faith inspires you to care for creation? What hinders you in caring for? I'm just going to pause the share so that we can see each other and have a chat if we would like to.
Well, people are thinking, just hello to Rick and to Tim and to Joyce with us online.
So one of the things that I was sharing at Synod on Saturday was that I found that the pandemic has made it slightly harder for me to do some of the things that maybe I have been doing previously in order to make a difference to my consumption and the way that I live in the world. So one of the things that I was really, really careful to do prior to the COVID pandemic was I used to use a shop which is up in Crooks called Unwrapped, which has refills for stuff. So I would take my bottles of washing up liquid, I would take my boxes with my washing powder in, I would take lots of other things of that type and go and refill them from a big vat that they had there, so that I wasn't creating more single-use plastic. I was refilling the ones I already had. I'd also take jars and fill from their special peanut butter machine, so much so that Martha called it the peanut butter shop. And when we went in, the woman would see us and go, "I'll just top the machine up for the peanut butter. I'll just top it up. Clearly you're going to buy a lot of peanut butter." But I would also buy things like my flour there, my rice, my pasta, and various other things as well. So I would go and take jars of my own and then fill them up myself. When the pandemic hit, that then involved catching a tram, changing off the tram and catching a bus and then getting all the way up to Crooks on a bus. And that suddenly felt a bit risky and suddenly felt like something I really wasn't very keen on doing. And then going into a shop where a load of other people pick up the scoop, take the pasta and put it into a jar, suddenly felt like something I didn't want to be doing in a pandemic. And so my plastic consumption has increased over the pandemic because that no longer felt like a very safe thing to be doing. So that's one of the things that hinders me in caring for creation. Suddenly, even though I've been really, really hot on caring about like single-use plastic over the last, I don't know, 7 or 8 years, in the last year and a half, I've been like, this comes wrapped in plastic. I can wipe it. I love this. And so I found that has really had an impact on the amount of consumption that I've had. So I'm wondering if anybody else has had similar experiences, maybe even linked to the pandemic, or just in things that you just find really hard, because convenience is kind of, it's convenient, isn't it? So what hinders you from doing maybe some of the things that you maybe think possibly should?
I think for me, it's taking things for granted. I don't shop, but my neighbour shops for me, and she goes down to Aldi in Dronfield. And the other week there was no milk because they couldn't get the containers. Then this week there was no eggs because they can't get the cartons. My husband should have had a blood test and they couldn't take it because they can't get the vials to take the blood. So I think things like that, we used to take them all for granted, that we're going to go to the shop, get exactly what we want, but now we can't.
Mm.
You know, and for a lot of people, it's causing a lot of problems.
So some of those problems are Brexit related, aren't they?
They are Brexit related, yes. But, you know, I think, well, if we can't get these things, what's the rest of the world doing? Are they without?
Yeah,
as
absolutely.
well. You know, if that's, you know, supposed to be a rich country, and these poor countries, how are they coping? I mean, another thing is the palm oil. You can't, and that's kind of nature, you can't, to look for a product that hasn't got palm oil in it is very, very difficult. Most things have got palm oil in it that's destroying the planet.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and it's insidious. It gets everywhere, palm oil. You kind of, even in stuff you would never consider that has palm oil in it, it's got palm oil. Yeah, a lot of chocolate products have palm oil in them. And again, you wouldn't necessarily think of that, but there they are. And that's the thing that's stripping rainforests and destroying habitats and places where a lot of animals live. Yeah. What about anybody else? Or indeed anybody who's watching on the live streams or on Facebook?
Maybe I can jump in to say, in my case, pre-pandemic, I used to use public transport so much because I work a little bit far away. I work in London, so taking a train. But during the pandemic, as much as we were restricted in terms of the amount of times that we're in the office, taking a public transport was not the safest thing to do. And then ended up, you know, having to drive, and that's making things worse in the environment, you know, driving all the way. So you're burning fuel, and which was not quite wise. Then I suppose when we did proper lockdown, we didn't go to work. So I sort of saved on that in that respect. But now I think things have eased up. Transport is not so busy, but it's also taking that step of faith and doing more than just driving, sometimes walking to church or cycling to church instead of driving to church, or maybe just walking earlier and starting off early, something which I think I should do more often to help reverse the degradation that we continue to use to impact on.
Yeah, so before the pandemic, obviously car use was quite high. Whilst we were all on lockdown, car use decreased hugely. And then we came out of lockdown and car use has gone back to pre-pandemic levels, and potentially maybe is slightly higher because people who would have used public transport now go, oh, sitting in a metal box, breathing in a whole lot of other people's air, maybe not, maybe not, maybe I'll go in my car. And yeah, absolutely. And it's then that whole personal safety versus environment and the world kind of issue. And it's really hard to make that call. Yeah.
So Rick's just saying on Facebook that, yeah, it kind of look at some of the stuff that you see in the news and maybe one of the only real options for the sake of the planet is actually a vegan diet. That we might all respond differently to that. You know, some who are vegetarian might go, well, that's just one more small step. But you know, is that really actually, seriously, is that kind of the situation we have created for ourselves and the rest of the world. Especially when things aren't available, let alone if it's seasonal. Yeah, I'm with Godfrey on the. I'm aware that I used to run, not just for an ice cream van, but used to go running, and yeah, I guess I'm just aware that I live at the top of one hill. I can go down to the valley and up the other side to get to the churches. And especially when I drove past Liz walking home the other day, I thought, blooming heck, I really ought to get my bottom in gear of walks. That's terrible. So yeah, that is something that I think hinders me, is my own. I've left it too late. Oh dear, no. And yeah, it's just short journeys in the car, especially when it's just me in the car. I've got to do something about that. That's not good. So yeah. And Joyce is saying that there's a shortage of bus drivers in Plymouth. So the buses are crowded. So that's pushing people back, like you're saying, because of the COVID risk and just not enough seats. People are going back onto cars rather than using the public transport they got used to.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of it is about safety, isn't it, at the moment, certainly to do with the pandemic, and then a lot of it is about our own convenience as well, and what feels easy, which we all do, let's be fair. And sometimes it's about just taking that slightly longer and less convenient step, isn't it, to make something different. Was there anything with the first question that came out about the Bible and what from your faith inspires you to care for creation, whether there's a particular verse or anything from within the Bible that particularly speaks to you about that?
Well, I think the hymn that we've just sung about the beauty of the earth and the beauty of the sky, we don't want to lose that beauty at all. And in the Bible, it keeps telling us about beauty and creation. And I think we've just got to do what we can, really, to preserve it. And I was listening to, it's a bit funny this, the farming programme this morning. It always comes on at 5:20. And there was a farmer there who was trying to prevent ammonia getting into the atmosphere. So he's got a barn full of cows, and he's taught them, he's built a latrine, and he's taught the cows to go and wee in the latrine so that he can collect all the rubbish and actually dispose of it properly. I think that's quite clever, don't you? So
wow.
You can teach a cow to use a latrine. I thought that was quite good, really, because I mean, we know that the ammonia from the cows is just polluting the planet.
That's impressive, because it was hard enough potty training my daughter, let alone training a load of cows. I mean, like that is pretty.
Well, they use the principle of potty training a child, and like probably you'd give it a reward. Well, you give the cows a reward of food, and then they'll do it, you see.
Speaking of rewards, Liz, what sort of reward do you get if you sit under a cow? Pat on the head.
Depends if you're sitting in the latrine or not.
Yes.
Flashback.
We're going to have a look at a reading now. So I'm going to share my screen again. I'm going to share that one there. And we're going to have a look at this reading, which is from Genesis chapter 1, and it is literally just Genesis chapter 1. So if you were joining us a couple of weeks ago when we will look at texts of terror, and we were thinking about some of the texts within the Bible that are maybe more controversial or maybe harder to sort of think about and decipher, then you will have heard us have a bit of a discussion about Genesis 1, but we're going to look at it tonight from a creation and from a environmental point of view instead. And I wonder whether anybody would like to read it for us.
I'm
So,
happy to.
would you mind, Godfrey? Would that be all right?
That's okay.
Fab. I was literally about to say Godfrey. There you were. Brilliant. Thank you very much. So all the words that you will need are up on the screen, and I will just flick them forward for you as you get to the end of the slide.
Genesis 1. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. And God said, "Let there be dawn in the midst of waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." So God made the dome and separated the waters that were under the dome from the waters that were above the dome. And it was so. God called the dome sky. And there was evening, and there was morning, the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the sky be gathered together in one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw it was good. And God said, then God said, "Let the earth," sorry.
Sorry, I double clicked. There we are.
Okay, that's it. Then God said, "Let the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seed, and the fruits of every kind on earth that bear fruit with the seed in it." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed of every kind, and the trees of every kind bearing fruit with the seed in it. And God saw it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the third day. And God said, "Let there be lights in the dome of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let there be signs and seasons, and for the days and years, and let them be lights in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth." And it was so. God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. God set them in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the fourth day. And God said, "Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and let the birds fly above the earth across the dome of the sky." So God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves, of every kind with which the waters swarm, and every winged bird of every kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let the birds multiply on earth." And there was evening, and there was morning, the fifth day. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures of every kind, cattle and creeping things, and wild animals of the earth of every kind." And it was so. God made the wild animals on the earth of every kind, and the cattle of every kind, and everything that creeps upon the ground of every kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, let us make humankind in our image, according to the likeness, and let them have dominion over the over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals on earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. God said, see, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree with the seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food, and to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day.
Thank you, Godfrey. You'll be really relieved to know that we've come to the end of Genesis 1. Thank you so much for reading all of that for us. People who join us regularly will know that we normally have a little bit of time to consider it and then hear it again. I'm probably not going to read it a second time because it was quite long. And I'm certainly not going to ask Godfrey to read it twice because that was a bit of a baptism of fire for your very first visit to our Bible study. But thank you very much, Godfrey, for being prepared to read it for us. So we're thinking about Genesis 1, and because it is a fairly familiar passage, we're not going to read it that second time. But instead, I'm going to ask you to have a look at these questions. So we're thinking about how do you respond to this passage? What encourages you in Genesis 1? What challenges you as we read through those words again? What questions do you have? So how do you respond to this passage? What encourages you? What challenges you? What questions do you have? I'm going to pause the screen sharing so that we can again join in conversation with each other. So what did that passage raise for you?
I think maybe I can start by the middle, which is what challenges, the negative. The challenges is we were given dominion over every living thing, every plant and everything. And we sometimes, or most of the times, fall short on that because we only consider at times, myself included, just as little things that I have control over, yet the passage is saying we were given control over everything.
Yeah. So the word used, certainly in the version which is the NIV, I believe, that we put up on the slides, is dominion. But the whether that is translated the same way in each of the different versions of the Bible, and sometimes when it's translated differently, it can give a slightly different a different slant to it when we think about it. So if you have a look at the Message version, it doesn't say dominion. It instead says God created human beings. He created them godlike. Be responsible for is the translation in the Message. So rather than saying God gave them dominion, as it does in the NIV, in the Message version it says God gave them God made them responsible, or be responsible for, which I think gives it quite a different slant, because I think if you think about how we think about the word dominion, we sort of tend to think about it as rulers and chiefdoms and little countries fighting over maybe one another. That's kind of the impression that we have of it as a word, and very much, you know, you would say a king has dominion or a ruler has dominion over the land that they are the ruler of. And dominion suggests that they just tell everybody what to do, or tell everything in that land what to do without any kind of comeback, whereas actually be responsible for has a really different slant to it, I think. Does that how do you respond to that? How do you feel about that as a different translation?
I've got the New International Version, and mine says rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and every other creature. Yeah. I found it interesting that it says give you the plants and the fruit trees and everything else. So maybe that is selling us that we actually should be vegan. Or
okay, yeah. So that was towards the end of the reading, wasn't it, where it says, "So I've given you every plant yielding seed that is upon the face of the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth, and everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food." And it was so. Yeah. So, is that a challenge to us? What would you feel about going vegan?
I think it's a challenge to us meat eaters, yes.
So Rick, who is sharing, says he loves the fact that God trusts us to have dominion over everything. It's a shame that we forget to manage it. But then also says we care for PLC companies rather than Jesus's justice, which is an interesting comment, isn't it? Do we end up lining the wallets of the fat cats more than we do seeking justice for the world itself? And he's referred us to Micah 6. I don't know if somebody wants to go look up what it says in Micah 6, James.
Well, no, while Leslie does that, I can see her flipping away. I've just looking. So Ian Hart, theologian, says that the word dominion, to exercise royal dominion over the earth as a God's representative, is the basic purpose which God created humankind. Humanity is appointed to rule, over creation, to be responsible, but responsible to God, who is the ultimate ruler. Therefore, our task is to manage and develop and care for creation. Our work, being made in God's image, is to faithfully represent God. So just this idea of to dominate, to have dominion, to rule, which, you know, we might think of some okay rulers, but we can probably think of more terrible ones. Actually, who are we mirroring in our care for creation, that it's a benign, like you said, benign, caring rule and care for.
Has it said a verse at all, or just Micah 6?
Micah 6.
The whole of it. I can read it if you wish.
Is there one bit that particularly focuses on this? Unless, Rick, you'd like to specify a particular part of Micah 6 that you wanted us to think about. While you have a look at that, Leslie, it was as we were talking about the thing that James just read out, about us sort of being rulers over God's creation, but then ultimately responsible still to God. It's sort of, he says, verse 8.
8.
Verse 8.
He has showed you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, to act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God.
Thank you, Rick. Yeah, absolutely. So what does the Lord require of you? So we are required to behave in that way, and yet don't always manage to do that. So I was pondering the idea that we are being asked to do a job by God. We are standing in God's stead as rulers over the works of God's hand, as it says in Genesis, as rulers, as people with dominion, or indeed, as the Message version says, as people who are responsible for. And it again, it's that with great power comes great responsibility kind of thing, isn't it? It's that reminder that if we're being given that job by God, then we are the visible outworking of God's care for the world. And if we are the visible outworking of God's care for the world, then we are God's representatives again in a different way here on earth, and we're not really living up to that in the way that we care for it, and we're not managing that in the way that God would do. So just in the way that God says, love as I have loved you, and we're called to do that for humankind, actually this is a reminder that we're called to do that for the whole of the earth, to behave as God would behave in the way that we go out and look after what is given to us freely as a gift, which is a huge challenge, isn't it?
So I know we've got a hat for Greek. I haven't got a hat for Hebrew, right? So here comes some Hebrew. So the Hebrew word, if I'm probably going to say it wrong, but the Hebrew word that is used for subdue is yarad, which is we've translated as subdue, and well, so it's yarad, but the way it's been translated, that about 700 years after Jesus in a translation, somebody put some dots over the word, which meant that it then became the word rada, which is where we get subdue from. So actually, if they'd not, for the copying of translations over time, that kind of difference happened. And actually, if they'd stuck it with the original word, root word of yared, actually means to come down or lower oneself. So is God actually saying, I give you, I call you, human beings, I have made you to lower yourself and to come down and care for. And if you think about what as Christians we believe God does in Christ for creation, actually is that a foreshadowing of what we originally called to do, that we're actually called down to yarad, God's creation, rather than subdue it, to rada it.
Ooh, which has echoes of some of the Bible study, or maybe the services, and I can't remember which one it was now, that we did, where we were looking at Peter on the beach with Jesus saying, tend my flock, tend my sheep, feed my sheep, but starting off by saying agape, but then in the final one saying philos, because the disciples couldn't work out what the word agape as love, I should be actually wearing my Greek notes, couldn't actually remember what those words mean and didn't get what that was about. And then Jesus lowered the words that he was using to an understanding that people had at that moment. So is that an echo then here in the creation story of us being asked to lower ourselves down rather than being in dominion?
I'm also remembering another Bible passage, which is Jeremiah 29, specifically where the Lord is speaking to the children of Israel who were brought into Babylon. They were exiles. And specifically verse 5, it says, build houses and settle down, plant gardens and eat what you produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, so they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in there, do not decrease. Also seek the prosperity, the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. I think the message is also talking about the planting and the eating of what we produce. It's also being, emphasized by the Lord.
But thank you, Godfrey. So it's interesting that you've picked up on something from Jeremiah, because he's echoing back, like you said, to Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar. Now, we did a whole load of studies on Daniel earlier in the year.
Oh,
and one of the things that we looked at in the very beginning of Daniel, I don't know if people remember this, is that the folks who came to Babylon from Israel, Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego, refused to eat meat and refused to eat the rich foods that the Babylonians were giving them, and instead said, no, we are going to live on a vegetarian diet. And all the Babylonians went, oh, no, not enough protein. There's no way you're going to be okay. And they said, well, let's do it for this amount of time and see if we're as strong as your young men. And in the end, they were stronger and managed to stay fit, and they kept on eating meat. And people who joined us in the Bible study will remember that we talked about that being because of not wanting to eat meat that had been sacrificed to a god but wasn't their god, and not wanting to eat meat that would have been ritually unclean. But it's an interesting thing, isn't it? So we've talked quite a lot about sacrifice in some of the Bible studies previously as well, about how sacrifice is about making holy. So the word sacrifice literally means make holy, set aside and make holy, and whether a choice to either eat vegetarian or eat vegan, or even just to lower our consumption in some way, is about saying, I'm making this holy, I am making this sacrifice for God. And it's not being done because we're offering the meat that we're eating now to idols, but instead, rather than idols of whatever gods Nebuchadnezzar was suggesting they worship, instead we're not offering it to the idol of big PLC companies like Rick has just suggested, or to the idol of capitalism, or to various different supermarkets or whoever it might be that we purchase it from. So is there a challenge in that for us to go, well, actually, this isn't just about, it is about the environmental stuff, but it's about a bigger thing that's about me being seen to buy into something that maybe I don't actually want to be buying into, just like Daniel and his compatriots did when they first came to Babylon. That is not a fully thought through suggestion, but it just, because Godfrey was talking about it, I was like, oh, we've done this. Nebuchadnezzar, I know about that. So yeah. So, Godfrey, you won't know this, but the people who are joining us in Bible study will know that I talk about sacrifice quite a lot. And I know it's boring, and I'm sorry. But I'm just going to talk about sacrifice for a minute, because one of the things about sacrifice that was a key part of the fact that they were offering this animal in some of the different different ways that they would do, for all the different ways in which offerings were made. Some of the time that would have been some of the only meat that was consumed. It would predominantly have been a mostly vegetarian diet, not necessarily completely, but a mostly vegetarian diet. And so the spilling of blood in sacrifice was a really serious thing, far more so than it is for us now, when we can go down to a supermarket, purchase our meat nicely wrapped up in plastic containers and then bring it home and cook it. It was far more visceral because you knew it and you saw it and you were involved in it yourself, but it was also a far more serious thing. So then if you slaughtered a calf to eat, you made sure that every part of it was consumed, and you made sure that it was all used well, and all of the skin was used, and all of the different parts of it that you could possibly use and make use of were done so. But you were doing it, you know, because you were making it holy, you were setting it aside, you were using it to mark something or other. And we've talked about all the sort of different kinds of offerings and all those kind of stuff. But it was about it saying, this isn't just an easy throwaway thing. This isn't just a consumable. This is a life, and we are taking the taking of that life really seriously. We are offering it to God, and we are making sure that when we do this, that we are honoring God in doing this. We are giving something aside to the priest. We are worshiping God whilst we're doing it, and then we are sharing it in a meal or a feast, and we are marking something by doing it. So it was that thing of setting aside, of making holy, of marking what we do in the way that we share it, and yet, because of convenience and because of mass farming and because meat is so much easier to come by now, when we take a life and when we eat it, we don't do that. We just go, hooray, sausages, hooray, chicken, whatever it is that we might be eating, and then we eat it. And you know, I'm vegetarian, so I don't. But when I wasn't, whatever else I was eating on my plate, I would always make sure that I ate whatever meat was left on my plate, because I had this thing about going, well, this is an animal's life that's been given for me. The very least I can do is finish off the meat, even if I'm full and I don't want the potatoes. I'm going to make sure that this gets eaten, because it's that kind of thing, and I'm not going to waste it, because I kind of feel like I ought to be honouring the fact that this is an animal that's given its life for me. So yeah, that thing of how do we set aside, how do we respect that, how do we maybe make it more of a setting aside and a holy and this is an unusual thing that we celebrate and really make a meal of, quite literally, rather than just going, hooray, we can get bacon every day and this is really, really easy. Yeah, I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, you've brought up a very good point in terms something to ponder, something to think about seriously, which is so poignant, in that I think we have tended to just follow what the system is allowing us to, without thinking through and delving deeper into the Bible passages. It's opening up to saying we should plant vegetables, and more so, it's talking about eating what we produce. Most of the times, I think I've got a small allotment which I tend here, and yeah, when I get time, I do that. I try to be self-sufficient, and it's something that we are no longer doing more of, yet the Bible is saying this is what we need to do. And like you rightly put across, to say it's a sacrifice. When we do that sacrifice of an animal, are we doing properly what God intended us to do? And if not, have we just gotten into the PLCs, the capitalists, just following what they are doing, and they continue to thrive by our ignorance? And so I should maybe not ignorance, but yeah, we're just following. It's that time of pondering, time of reflection, to say, what's my part in this?
Yeah. So, okay, so Godfrey has given an example of growing your own food at home and in an allotment. So where I live, there are literally allotments sort of behind the back of my house, and I walk through the allotments every morning and evening to take Martha to and from school. And I'm always amazed by the fact that people have time to go to their allotments and do all that growing. And I think, oh, that's amazing. I would love to do that. I would love to do it in my garden, but I can't manage to mow my lawn, let alone grow vegetables. And I'm in awe of anybody who manages to do it. And one of the things, you may not all know this, but there are quite a few gardening projects and quite a few social justice projects of that sort that happen within our circuit, and certainly within some of the churches that you guys would know. So we have a community allotment garden which takes place up in Creswick and Mount Tabor, and up in the north of the circuit, where they have community allotments where people come and they grow food. They grow food to share with each other. They grow food to share with the community. They grow food to eat together in a meal. And it's not necessarily people from within the worshipping congregation. It's people from all over the local area. It's people who come to the local food bank. They give some of the food to the food bank. People come and share it. But it's about creating community through the food that they grow and through what they have produced. So they've taken it that step further from going, well, we're going to be self-sufficient and we're going to grow some of this stuff ourselves, to then going, well, how do we then reach out to the local community through this, and how do we create a sense of coming together around food, around a meal, around the things that we can share while we do that. At Gleadless Valley Church, they have a community garden, and again, it's on the Gleadless Valley estate. You'll probably know that the Gleadless Valley estate is not one of the best off or safest areas to live in. The community garden stays untouched because it's for the community. It's for people who can come and take what they need from it and come and be a part of the community when they come and serve in it. And it's for the food bank that is part of that church in that space. We have a community garden at Holland's End in one of my churches where people come together and share their love of gardening and have a space where they can come and share community with each other as they're growing that produce. And that's, I think, mostly about kind of having that sense of building community and being able to do something together that you're working towards together as well. Those are just the ones that I can think of off the top of my head. There are others. James, do you want to?
So, and this is what happens when, lockdown occurs and we can't get out and about as we wanted, and then amazing things happen that you didn't know about right on your doorstep. So Appinall Farm. So Appinall, I'm in Johnfield, so little village up the top of the hill, more hills that I haven't walked up, I've driven up. So it's 7 acres of land, and it is part of the Landmark Specialist College. Numerous opportunities for learners to develop skills, knowledge and behaviour working in a practical environment. But what they did during the lockdown, when people weren't really able to get involved as much, I think they started during the lockdown giving people opportunities. But what was amazing was overnight residents of Appinall suddenly started waking up to find fresh eggs on their doorstep. So this thing of sacrifice, of making holy even in the middle of a pandemic, that people were, who perhaps might have not been otherwise in mainstream education or opportunities, being supported and actually ministering, serving the local community and giving a gift of grace and care to people who weren't able to get out. And it just happened very quietly, and just waking up and finding eggs on your doorstep. Have a blessing of eggs this morning. There you go. So yeah, I literally only discovered that through church council, a few weeks ago. So it's again, just what else we might do where I am, and how we might link with, for me, what God is already doing out and about. It might not be people who would say they're doing it from a position of faith, but I just think you think things like that. That sounds like God to me. And yeah, what might I learn? What might I join in with? Yeah.
So sorry, Liz, go on.
The doctors now are prescribing gardening to a lot of the patients, especially those that have got mental illness. And I think mental illness is going to grow amongst all our communities because of the effects of lockdown. And gardening is absolutely a wonderful thing for anybody to do. And if we can have more community gardens around, then I'm sure, we could bring the community more cohesively together. Because normally all the schools have got a garden that they work with. All the schools in Drumfield have a garden.
Yeah, and
You
one
know,
of the supermarkets is actually endorsing that and giving vouchers out so you can give them to schools so they can grow produce at school. Yeah, I think it's Sainsbury's, I'm not sure.
So it's interesting that we've started off talking about growing stuff because of the Bible reading and about the see I've given you every plant yielding seed upon the face of the earth, and about maybe going vegetarian in a climate justice way, but how it then impacts upon community, upon social justice, upon mental health, upon people coming together in various different ways. So it started off as one particular thing that we were talking about, and then it's broadened itself so much. And I do wonder whether there's something in that, and in this Genesis reading that's about saying, when you separate yourself off from how your food is produced and how you grow it and how you do that in community and how you help each other to do that, and you're in isolation and you forget how that all happens, you become more easily consuming, and you become less attached to the world, and you become less attached to what's going on in creation around you, and you become less attached to your communities and less dependent on each other to help each other with your produce and your crops and your food and everything else. And actually it's like kind of back to basics, folks. Let's get back to what we did right at the very beginning of creation. Let's get back to where we were right at the start, where we all had to look after and help each other and nurture together and work together as
Well, I don't know if everybody saw this, and so I'm going to give away perhaps my politics here by woolly lefty over here. But it was in the Guardian. All right, this was in the Guardian. But there was a report from the Pharaoh Isles where historically, culturally, for the Pharaoh Isles, there is a type of fishing that they would do, which is called grind hunting, which is effectively kind of, I think it's almost shepherding shoals of fish into shore so that they end up beached, and then they are killed. And obviously, historically, I think as Godfrey said, as Melissa said, you would do that, and you would probably take what you needed, and you'd use all of it, and you'd store some of it, and it would get you through, the season when perhaps there weren't the fish around so much because they were, migrating or moving around for their own food. But this then is, part of heritage and culture for the islands, which I think I could appreciate and get into in terms of wanting to preserve cultural things. However, I think today it was the largest ever essentially cull massacre of dolphins through this hunt, because they all ended up on the beach. There weren't enough people on the beach to kill them, so they ended up suffering on the beach and then being put out of misery, which is grim. But again, it's so again, not using what we need, and just again, as we want to perhaps learn and look back to the positive stuff, perhaps when we were more self-sufficient and we only ate what was in season or what we could grow in the garden. And it's, don't get me wrong, it's a joy to eat foods from around the world. It's fantastic, and it's a real gift and blessing. It's where we understand each other more, perhaps across cultural boundaries. But is there something about, I don't know, the tension between preserving, whether it's Pharaoh Isles culture or whatever cultural thing, that actually the impact on creation is potentially just another form of consumerism and wastefulness. And it's not meant to be a critique of those on the Pharaoh Isles. I think certainly in the UK, there's plenty of things that we could point to that we do that is a complete waste and equal disrespect for nature. But it was just interesting that it's a one way of wanting to do something that was accessing food in a way that would have been done traditionally, but in a context now where we don't need to do that, because we can literally go and buy what we need from a shop. But culturally, it's something that is harking back to and keeping going a way of life that has sustained those islands for centuries. And so how do we have those sorts of conversations, I guess, between culture as well as care for creation, and care for culture and people as well as care for creation and the natural world.
Yeah, talking about care for creatures and the creation, I think we could learn an awful lot from creatures, especially in the sea, and what effects that climate change is having, that's changing the creatures' habits these days. And I think we could do with changing our habits like they do to adapt to a new environment, which isn't going to get any better, really. And you've only got to watch the television, the animal programs, how the animals are trying to adapt to the situation and are surviving. So I think for us to survive, we've got to adapt our ways, be it vegetarian or whatever.
Yeah.
And in amongst that, there's a challenge for us, isn't there? So animals are adapting themselves because of what we have done to the world. So then the challenge isn't just about us adapting, it's about us saying, how do we stop what we're doing that makes animals have to adapt, and be the ones who adapt instead, rather than as well as.
So Jane was just saying on Facebook that she feels guilty as doesn't particularly eat green veg unless it's in salad or stir fry. Well, that's one more lot than me, Jane. Don't do salad. Tomato, that's salad, isn't it? That counts. It's a fruit, really, but yeah. But her lads like their meat. But perhaps the biggest thing we can do if we are going to eat, like you say, Melissa, if we are going to eat meat, that actually whatever we eat, let's not waste it. Let's be thankful for it and let's make the most of it, so we're not chucking it away and consuming even more.
So there is a movement. So I've only been vegetarian for how old is Martha? Martha's nearly 6, so 6.5 years. And I went vegetarian because while I was pregnant with Martha, I went off meat completely. And then once I'd been off meat for a while, I then was like, well, why am I going back on to eating meat after I'd had Martha? And I kind of had a look at it and all the different impacts that eating meat had. And I particularly wanted to stop eating meat because of the environmental impact that had, having done a whole load of research. But even before I did that, one of the things that I used to do was do a thing called Meat Free Mondays, which was a campaign that had been started. And it was about saying if everybody didn't eat meat on a Monday, then you'd effectively decrease your meat consumption by at least 1/7 of what you normally have, which means that the emissions relating to the amount of meat production that goes on would decrease by quite a lot. And so I used to do that regularly, and then obviously sort of slowly that became something that it was just meat free rather than just Meat Free Monday. But they reckon that if everybody went vegetarian, then the emissions across the whole of the world would decrease by 1/3. And if everybody went vegan, it would be 2/3. I think that's the correct. I'd have to check it to make sure. It's certainly 1/3 for vegetarian. And that's not thinking about, air travel or cars or any of that. It's simply emissions that are based on the meat industry and the packing and the processing and all of the shipping that go along with the meat industry. If we all, and that would be everybody in the world, so 6.5 billion people, but if everybody ate vegetarian, emissions across the world would drop by 1/3, which is incredible, isn't it? So actually the choices that we make do make a big difference. And again, I'm not telling anybody that you should all go and be vegetarian, but it's that thing about being mindful of what we do and thinking about the choices that we are making, and maybe saying to ourselves, well, I'm going to do this because it's a special occasion, or I'm going to do this because I'm particularly marking this, or I'm going to have a day a week where I don't eat meat because that makes it all that much more important and pleasurable and carefully considered when I then do, or I'm going to consider ethically the sources of the meat that I choose, or whatever it might be. It's about the intentionality of the choices that we make, as much as the fact that we do or do not eat meat. Yeah.
So can I recommend we all go and watch Gladiator just for the line, "What we do in life echoes in eternity." Marcus Aurelius. Yeah. Here we are. Quitting meat can reduce your carbon footprint more than quitting driving. And this is from The Guardian in 2014. Yeah. Yeah.
Were there any other challenges, questions, or things that people were encouraged or wanted to comment on based on that Genesis reading? Or anything that we haven't kind of looked at that you wanted to kind of raise?
I looked up Acts while we were talking about meat, and Peter's vision in chapter 10, where he was told eat and kill.
Yep. Was there any particular sort of thing that you were thinking
it
of
was just said that,
or?
nothing that I've created is unclean, because Peter said, "I don't eat anything that's unclean or impure."
Yeah.
Or never has done. God said nothing that he's created is unclean or impure. So don't know, it just come to mind because I'm trying to justify eating meat now.
you don't have to justify eating meat. It's totally okay.
I was just wondering whether when we talked about we talked a bit ago about the way that particularly Methodists do their theology, their talk of God, that we do it in the Wesleyan quadrilateral. I should get my mortarboard now. But we look at the Bible, which is I guess where we started tonight. We look at church history or doctrines, the way passages have been interpreted and applied and lived out in church history. But we use kind of we think it through, we use our reason, but also we base it on experience. So, what is going on now? What is the lived out experience? And how do we then go back to scripture and look at church history? And so it's kind of that cycle, if you like. Because I was just thinking, when we looked at some of the stuff in Leviticus and Deuteronomy about, things that were, don't be eating shellfish, and if it's got this, if it's got a cloven hoof, then don't. If it's got this, if you choose the cup, then you can. But then the New Testament, God kind of saying, actually, it's all clean. So there's been a shift, and is that shift at that time through the ministry of Jesus, saying actually rather than Jesus, the Son of God, being for just the people of Israel, but actually it's for all people. Is that the sort of the challenge to religious history and doctrine that's being made there? And it'd be interesting now, would we want to challenge it again? And would it be actually, it's all clean, God made all of it, but actually, I don't know, from our experience, would we want then to revisit and go, well, actually, what is the most caring thing? So is it just us applying that same sign? We might come to different conclusions ourselves about what we can do. And I guess, to quote Mr. Wesley, as I mentioned, the Wesleyan quadrilateral, but do all the good you can by all the means you can in all the ways you can, whatever so you can. You kind of hear that and go, do it all the good. But is it do all the good that you can? And as in faith and humility, we read the scripture and prayerfully discern it and talk together. There are things that I might be able to do that feel like a lot for me and all that I can do. Alan Mavis way off there doing something, all this amazing stuff, and I'm like, oh blimey, I'm just they're very holy. But if we just do what we can do, what I can do, and that all makes a difference, I guess.
So Rick on Facebook is sharing a little thought on what Leslie was saying. He says nothing is unclean, we've just messed up our own resources. And he also says, don't feel bad, it's not just you, it's all of us over many years. Thank you, Rick. So I A couple of years ago, I did Remembrance Sunday at Freshville, and the sermon that I preached, we were talking about peace, and peace starts with us. But also how, when you look at what's going on in the world, how on earth can you make a difference, and how can you possibly hope to impact upon all the different things that's happening just by living peacefully yourself. And I referenced climate change, and I talked about the differences that we can make, and how, recycling your plastic feels like a tiny thing in amongst all of the big corporations that are doing, virtually nothing and aren't making a difference in all the things they should be doing. But talked about how, we can only be responsible for our own impact and the things that we are doing. But also, people say the phrase, well, it's just a drop in the ocean, but the ocean is made up of many, 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 many drops. And it's like when you talk about voting and how, people say, well, it's just one vote, it's not going to make a difference. But actually, if you watch the American presidential elections, where they were counting and recounting and counting again and counting again and counting again and challenging and all the different things, it was, in some of those states, just a couple of votes that made those differences. And it is those couple of drops of water that make a difference. So it's that reminder that it might not feel like we're making a difference, but if all of us do that little bit, then together we do make more of a difference, and together we are corporately responsible for making those tiny changes which add up into bigger changes. And if you want to know the impact of drops of water, leave your tap dripping, just one drop every several seconds, and see how quickly it fills up a bucket. It doesn't feel like it's going to do it, but if you leave it a long time, sooner or later that bucket will fill up and it will flood your kitchen, and you will come downstairs to a great big puddle all over the floor. Don't ask me how I know that. So it's that thing of, it may seem like a very small amount, but slowly those drips all add up.
All right, thank you. Just to quote something from the BBC, I guess doing what we can and maybe doing a bit. So if we conform to the World Health Organization's recommendations about consuming meat for the UK, we'd drop the UK's greenhouse emissions by 17%, and it would drop by another 40%. So that's 57% so it's about eating meat in moderation. And if we also then avoided, so we get 57% if we avoided further animal products and processed snacks. A very clever scientisty person say these dietary changes the consumers would barely notice, like having just a slightly smaller piece of meat. It's not either or. It doesn't have to be either or, vegetarian or carnivore. So addressing, so for example, I think as Jana said, if we waste even what we do eat, if we ate all of it, that fewer than 50% of the calories currently produced are actually used effectively. So that's how much we're kind of wasting or throwing away. So maybe it's just having less or having it less often. Sounds like it makes a huge difference. And if we all did at least some of that, then who knows?
So Rick's commented on Facebook, picking up from that. Most important thing I say is be centered. Forget about ethics. Just walk in the place where you and God are, says Rick. And then he follows that on with saying, and then all will follow. Seek first the kingdom of God.
Just on that point about how things link together. So me and Jane are having a conversation about apples on Facebook.
As you do.
So again, they're kind of buying local and reducing air miles of where our food comes from. And I did not know this, that during apartheid in South Africa, that people started boycotting apples from South Africa, and it made a difference, kind of politically and socially as well. So again, I think it's Godfrey was saying that not only if we become sustainable and grow our own, but actually we think about what we're eating, and then it becomes a sacrifice and making things holy because we share together and work together as a community to produce things, and we might do a swap of, if anyone wants any rhubarb, seriously, I'll swap it for some peas or some corn. All right. Oh, there we are. Thank you, Leslie. I'll be around. Yeah, in the same way that actually, it has a knock-on effect in terms of community, in the way that Beavers Valley or Mount Tabor and Parton Cross, but equally kind of globally as well. That it's, I suppose it's similar to not having buying Nestle because of not just the fair trade thing, but the enabling mothers in developing countries saying no, don't use your own milk. Why would you want to use your own milk when you can have some of this lovely powdered stuff that will give you for free, and then we'll stop giving you for free and charge you for it? It's perhaps some of it all seems connected. Interesting, that is what I'm badly trying to say.
And also kind of bringing food from abroad as well. Potatoes are a shining example. When the potatoes come over, they change the molecular structure, so they get more sugar content. And it's same with meat. It just all changes its molecular structure. So when it was fresh and killed, it was different to what it is when it's imported and comes on our shelves.
Well, there's that's some of the genetic manipulation that some food has gone through, isn't it? In terms of like the color that we expect certain foods to be, the shape we expect certain foods to look like, but all those other kind of ways in which we've got an expectation, and therefore places have sought to fill those in the way that things are produced and sold and grown.
Because you don't often see a white egg these days.
No.
Yeah. When I was a child, there were always white eggs.
More frequently, I don't know. I did have chickens for a small time, and the variation in colour was quite interesting. But interesting, you don't see so many white eggs, and I've never seen a white elephant.
No.
Not even on the white elephant store.
Maybe we should do like other faiths and go into fasting for so long. You think? And don't eat.
Interesting. Yeah.
We'd be a lot healthier. A lot hungrier.
But I suppose again, because that is there in Jesus going into the desert, it's taking himself off. It's in monastic traditions. It's in the desert fathers and mothers. Disappearing and spending 40 years stood on top of a pillar, contemplating God, and people will kind of lift up food to you as a sort of, oh, bless me with your holiness, and let me give you some food. But we've again. I'm not sure that I guess during Lent, maybe we do. I know there's like Lent lunches for Christian Aid where you eat less, you have some fellowship, and you donate what you would have spent to organisations like Christian Aid or All We Can, who are working, tackling some of the impact of, countries like the UK on other parts of the world. But do we do it? We don't do it regularly. We don't do it annually in the same way we do, say, Muslims would do Ramadan. But yeah, it's interesting.
And again, fasting is a mindfulness thing, isn't it? I don't mean mindfulness in a kind of popular culture use as it does at the moment. It's more of about being mindful of what we are eating, when we are eating, the time when we would be eating, then giving that time to God and spending that time in prayer. It's about denying ourselves to take up our cross and follow God. It's about the concentrating our hearts and mind. There's a whole load of stuff behind it, isn't there, that's sort of inherent in it, that isn't just about saying, well, I'm not going to have this for a certain amount of time, and the impact that will have. I'm going to read, or I'm going to share the screen now with another voice. So again, if you've joined us for Bible study over the last couple of months, you'll know that quite often, as well as sharing a Bible passage, we'll then use something else that comes from outside of the Bible, which maybe gives some different light and gives some information about some of the things we're talking about. So I'm going to share my screen and share this quote here, which comes from David Attenborough, and it says, "The fact that no species has ever had such wholesale control over everything on Earth, living or dead, as we now have. That lays upon us, whether we like it or not, an awesome responsibility. In our hands now lies not only our own future, but that of all other living creatures with whom we share the earth." The fact is that no species has ever had such wholesale control over everything on Earth, living or dead, as we now have. That lays upon us, whether we like it or not, an awesome responsibility. In our hands now lies not only our own future, but that of other living creatures with whom we share the earth. So a chance, if we want to respond to that statement by David Attenborough. And when we looked up to use some statements by David Attenborough for this evening, there were there were so many we could possibly have chosen. We went with this one. How do you respond to this statement? What encourages you? What challenges you? What questions do you have based on that statement that David Attenborough made? I might put it back up on the screen so you can see it.
I just wonder whether it brings us almost full circle to kind of guess where Godfrey started us off. That it's our responsibility. It's not ours to subdue or to dominate. It's ours to be responsible for and take responsibility for, and to perhaps just look again to the way we've interpreted or changed our interpretation of the Bible and perhaps what God was originally trying to say to us, to actually mirror God, and all the stuff that Rick said about actually to walk humbly, to tread lightly on God's creation.
So there are places in America where you can go wild camping. So in the UK, you can only camp in specific places where you are allowed to do so. You can go and do that in sort of various wildernesses and stuff in America. But the rule is that you must leave it untouched. So there should be no evidence that you have camped there. There should be nothing that you have done that has ruined and despoiled the place in which you have camped. And you should go away without there being evidence of the fact that you have camped there, besides potentially a slightly flattened bit of grass, which will obviously spring back. And that thing about treading lightly on the earth, we haven't. We've stamped all over it and jumped up and down on it and then kicked it a bit, I think. And justified that by saying, well, we've been given dominion, we've been allowed, rather than saying, is it dominion or is it lowering ourselves to look after and care for? Any other thoughts on that quote from David Attenborough?
I would think we're being reminded, which is quite encouraging, that we're being reminded of our responsibility and that the future is in our hands. Also, it's a challenge. And what we do then thereon is to be mindful of every step we take. here and now. And one other thing which I wanted to include a point on is the global degradation which we have caused is so severe now. The effects are being, the impact is quite great everywhere else. These floods, that's a big sign of that, of how much damage we've caused, which calls not a light touch on what we do, or how we start changing our lifestyle, but a radical change, a real radical change in our way of living, in caring for God's climate, God's creatures, God's environment, and everything that we have responsibility or dominion over. So I think there's a big challenge here.
So I'm old enough to remember in the sort of, I don't know, late 80s maybe, the stuff about the hole in the ozone layer, and how we were reminded that CFCs were causing it, aerosol products that had CFCs in. Once we were aware of the damage that was caused, were almost completely kind of cut out very, very quickly. I mean, it probably wasn't overnight, but it felt like it was done quite swiftly. Suddenly, there were all this stuff about you couldn't just leave your fridge, and you had to be careful about how you got disposed of it because of the gases that were in it. And there was all this stuff that was about the damage that had been done to the ozone layer, and it was something that we all learned about as kids at primary school and all those different things. And we made those changes, and the hole in the ozone layer has gradually, over the course of the last sort of 30 years or so, started repairing itself, and is now a lot better than it would have been when I was a kid. Because we took notice, we listened, we changed, and we made those differences. And it was because I think maybe part of it was because there was there were graphics and images, and people were told exactly what an impact it might have on us in terms of skin cancer and the problems that would occur about the sun's rays and all those kind of stuff. Whereas I think maybe with global warming, until more recently, until the last 5 years or so, the potential consequences have been ephemeral. It's been hard to kind of picture them, or I have an idea of what they might be like, or they were happening, but they were happening to other people and maybe not to us, particularly in the Western world. And therefore it was really hard to get a grasp of, well, you know, how much of an impact that had, and get an idea of how bad it might be, because in our potentially slightly selfish nature, as we do, it wasn't happening to us, and therefore it was kind of okay. Whereas now, visibly, it is happening to us. And we are aware of the huge changes that are being wrought in our climate because of the difficulties that we have put the world in. And so maybe there's a slight better, maybe people are more motivated to make changes because they can see those differences. I'm aware of the time, and although it's been a really good conversation and I don't really want to stop us doing it, I'm also aware of the time. And we are going to carry on doing these conversations over the next couple of Bible studies. So it would be good to kind of carry on some of our thoughts from tonight and keep them going into the next couple of sessions as well, as we delve deeper into some of the other passages that we're going to have a look at. But I'm going to move us on in the slides to thinking about what we can do. So we've talked about all sorts of different stuff in this evening, and we've talked about some of the different things that we might be able to do. I'm just going to offer us a time of reflection to consider what maybe we could do differently, and what we might be being challenged to do individually and maybe corporately as well, because of some of the things we've talked about tonight. So I invite you to watch this and to consider, what might you be being challenged and called to do? So I'm going to skip on through some of the other things that we were going to do for this evening and take us on to the grace, because I think I want to leave us with that challenge and those questions that we were asked in that time of reflection as we watched those beautiful flowers bloom and nature slowly unfurling itself. So what I'd like us to do just before we say the grace together and end our time of sharing is to encourage you to think about what one small change you might be able to make over the next week. I'm not asking you all to go vegetarian or vegan overnight or all to stop kind of using your own cars or any of that, but what one small thing might you be able to do that could make a difference to the world in which we live? And then when we come back and share again in 2 weeks' time, we can talk about what we had chosen to do and what impact that had on us and how it felt to be able to do that. So that's your challenge to go away and consider as we end our time together this evening. So I want to say a big thank you. I'm going to just pause and take this off screen share actually so that we can, oh, there we go, so that we can say goodbye to each other and to those folk who are joining us on Facebook. So a big thank you to everybody on Zoom who's joined in with our conversations and been a part of what we've talked about this evening. And a big thank you to everybody who has joined in on Facebook as well and who have contributed to our discussions this evening. And thank you for bearing with us through some of the tech issues that we just sort of experienced sort of towards the beginning of this study. It's been really good to be with you this evening. Do join us in 2 weeks' time. Wave to Joyce who's waving at us. Do join with us in 2 weeks' time when we'll continue our conversations and discussions. And if you want to watch streamed worship on Sunday, then worship will be streamed live from St. Paul's. James, is that correct? At 10:30.
I think we're streaming from Colaston at 10:30, St. Paul's at 10:30.
Awesome. And so you can join in with churches in Dronfield and District at 10:30 via either Colaston or St. Paul's for worship through them, or you can join with Methodists in S12, which will be streaming live from Gleadless. So there are options for you to join in online worship or to join on-site worship as you choose. Rick says, I've loved this time. It's been beautiful and so motivating to do my dance a bit better and louder. Thank you for opening this God date for me, at least, and as always, shalom. So thank you, and thank you so much, Rick, for joining in and for all that you've shared this evening. That's been really amazing to be a part of that. That's been really cool. So thank you all very much. See you online or in person at some worship and some Bible study in a space near you sometime soon. And let's share end by sharing the grace together. Which I have skipped forward on my PowerPoint, so let's just go backwards. There we are. So let's share the grace, and those folk on Zoom, you might like to unmute yourselves so that we can all say it together. So I invite us to share and say, may the grace
of our Lord
Lord
Jesus Christ, the love of God,
fellowship
and the
Fellowship
of the Holy Spirit,
the Holy Spirit
be with us
be
all,
with us all, evermore.
evermore.
Amen.
Amen. So thank you all again, folks who are on Zoom. Would you like to do your celebrity squares wave to all the folk who have been joining us on Facebook? Thank you all very much, and we're going to